Hi, this is Len in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles. Today is March 13th, 2020, and this is episode 606. For this episode, I thought I would return to Jerry Riddle, A.G. Riddle, to talk about the coronavirus. We last spoke with him on February 15th, and that was for TKC 603, released on February 21st. When I went back and listened to that, I realized that's when Darlene and I were working on a political campaign in Las Vegas, and I uploaded that episode from our hotel room at the Bali Casino and Resort. That seems like a long time ago, now that our candidate, Mayor Pete, has ended his campaign, and last night showed up as the guest host for Jimmy Kimmel Live, a late-night comedy show. Anyway, I thought it would be helpful to reconnect with Jerry Riddle for this week's show, and I reached him at his home in Raleigh, North Carolina on Wednesday, March 11th. That was 25 days after the first conversation, and in that period of time, the number of novel coronavirus cases reported worldwide had risen from about 69,000 to nearly 130,000, and the number of cases reported here in the U.S. had risen from 15 to 1,039. Now, Jerry, like all of us, is tracking news of the outbreak carefully. He also has the benefit of 2 years of research concerning the Center for Disease Control, CDC, and the World Health Organization, WHO, that he did for his science-based thriller titled Pandemic, published in April of 2017. That was the first of a two-book series titled The Extinction Files. And in college, he also had some related experience because when he was a student at UNC Chapel Hill, he worked at the UNC hospital on clinical trials. Now, these are involving non-lethal viruses, but he was there doing chemistry or whatever you do when you're working on possible solutions for non-lethal viruses. His familiarity with the science of virus outbreaks and his calm, compassionate approach to the topic have made me really grateful that he's willing to spend time sharing his views with us and advice on coronavirus. As it turns out, the coronavirus was officially designated by the WHO as a worldwide pandemic on Wednesday, March 11th, and that was the day that I reached Jerry at his home in Raleigh. I began by asking him if he had become more or less alarmed by the coronavirus outbreak in the time since we had last spoke.
The thing that makes me more alarmed is the response or sort of lack thereof. I mean, certainly some surprises in the last 25 days. I mean, with something like this, I mean, like I said on the other interview, I felt that containment would fail and that we'd see cases around the world in a large case count by this point. But I mean, I don't think anyone was expecting Italy and South Korea to get as bad as they did, as quick as they did. I'm actually really surprised by the decrease in cases in China. And if you believe that the numbers at face value, it's a little surprising. And, I think, it's definitely I feel a really critical time in the course of the outbreak right now.
And I've been confused at how Italy, 60 million people, basically very limited in being able to travel anywhere in that country. And here, everybody's stocking up with food and doing things, but nothing approaching that level. Is the path of the virus kind of random in terms of which parts of the world it takes hold and prompts government responses which are so varying at this point across the world?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be. I mean, there is some amount of chance, obviously, involved in this. I mean, in South Korea, I believe there was a church that was, a super spreader event. The big risk factors, obviously, are urban density. Countries with a bigger population in a smaller geographic area are going to are going to be at higher risk, and populations that are older are at higher risk. So Italy has an older population. They have, like I said, 60-something million people in a pretty small area. I mean, Japan is obviously a country that's at risk. And, the United States of America with 330 million people, we're pretty big, geographically dispersed, but we have very large urban centers. And then I think the other difference is the government response. I mean, Italy and South Korea are obviously being very proactive. Our government is, let's just say, taking a bit more of a wait and see or cautious, or, more of a, I guess, delayed response, I guess, is the option they've chosen.
They declared, the governor of Massachusetts yesterday, I believe, declared a state of emergency for Massachusetts, and there are 92 reported cases so far. I think about 70 of them from one conference of a biotech company. I guess that would be likely that because of the way the states play such a role in the overall governmental system, that some of the response will be different just because state governments are taking different approaches to it.
Well, that's right. And, I think that's the way it's going to be, right? I mean, the states are to some degree tasked with this, but it needs to be, in my view, a bit more of a coordinated national approach. I mean, the national government exists for situations like this, which are basically a large-scale natural disaster, right? Like I would, the way I would encourage listeners to look at this is a 100-year storm, right? Like, the structures we put in place and live by every day, we realize that there are risk factors in our lives, and, there's obviously a hurricane season. If you live on the coast, you're a higher risk than someone, say, inland, who lives like in Raleigh, North Carolina, as I do. But every 100 years, there's going to be a storm that's something new that stresses the system, and that's what's going to happen here. This is a biological event that is exceedingly rare, but needs to be dealt with in a way that is going to be uncommon and probably won't be seen in our lifetimes, hopefully. And you're just going to, the local health department just cannot deal with it. The state health department can't. And you need the CDC. You're probably going to need FEMA at some point. The same way we had FEMA support during Hurricane Katrina or something like that. It's the same sort of deal.
As the virus spreads and governments react both at the federal and the state level, I haven't read enough about the situation in Italy to know how much advance warning people got before they found themselves not able to travel within Italy. But when you think ahead to what we might be experiencing here in the United States over the next weeks or months, are things likely to change overnight based on a new tranche of data that prompts government reaction, which might catch people by surprise and they wouldn't have time to go out and get that extra week or two backup food and really respond before the door closes?
Well, that's a really good question, and I don't know. I mean, I think the response here in the United States has surprised me on several levels, and I will admit that there's two major risk factors. One is the biological risk, and then there's the economic risk, and both are very real. The biological risk is principally focused on people that are older, who have underlying respiratory conditions and perhaps a weakened immune system. And to go back to the storm analogy, if the people on the coast during hurricane season are at a much greater risk than the people inland. But this is the reason we have a national government, is to protect our neighbors in times of need when they need help. So, as far as supply lines, the great thing about America is that, we're very much a consumer-driven economy, and, you can buy stuff pretty readily in this country. It's not that hard, and our delivery infrastructure is very robust. So that's probably not one of my biggest concerns, and I would only add to that, is that the government hasn't moved particularly fast on this thing. So, and they seem less concerned about the biological consequences than the economic consequences, which I think are a fair consideration, but they've been less apt to confine travel because of the economic consequences, right. I think.
That's certainly been very different in the response in China, it appears.
That's right, and arguably that's one of the advantages that China had. I mean, if the numbers really are true, I think what they've pulled off is an actual feat of achievement. I mean, in 1997, when it was the avian flu, like the H5N1, there was a flu virus that jumped from chickens to humans, and I think it killed a young child, and they sent the lab in Hong Kong didn't recognize it. They sent it to CDC and somewhere else, the Department of Health in China, and then they figured out that it was this very old flu virus that hadn't been seen in a long time. And the Chinese, they slaughtered, I think, 1.5 million chickens against the wishes of the farmers. Obviously, I think that saved a lot of lives back then. I think they probably saved a lot of lives now. I mean, the big risk, frankly, is caseload on the hospitals. I mean, the hospital infrastructure, we've only got so many beds. We can't really create a lot more beds in the amount of time that you would need for something like this. I mean, the basic problem with this is that it's an extraordinarily contagious pathogen. And so what essentially the order of the day is to slow it down so that the hospitals can deal with the cases as they come in, because it gets really dangerous if the hospital's full and you've got 20,000 critical cases sitting in the parking lot. Then what do you do?
Yeah. I've seen a graph that shows a big hump if social distancing and these other measures aren't successful, and if they are successful, that's a much more gradual increase that stays within the capacity of the hospital system to deal with it.
Yeah, that's correct.
The WHO today declared coronavirus a pandemic, and they cited alarming levels of spread and severity, and also the alarming level of inaction, which I think echoes some of what you've been saying. What's the significance of the World Health Organization actually coming out and using that word to describe what we're facing?
Well, it looks, in a sense, it looks like a plea directly to the populace to sort of spur some actions from public entities, from governments and maybe NGOs. And I think there's a really careful balance here of sparking too much panic and then having, being too complacent. And somewhere in the middle is the right amount of action. And I think the fear right now is principally economic, is that if we freak out too much, we get this drawn-out recession. There are implications for the election currently happening in the U.S. But I think my sense is that there's going to have to be much more proactive response now. And, it's sort of like you can freak out now or you can freak out later. It's too late. So, I choose now. But I think, it would have been a lot better to do it, I think, 2 weeks ago or a month ago, right? But yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, if you ask me the big problems now, the big things that I'm concerned about are retirement homes and assisted living facilities. I mean, these are ground zero. I mean, we talk about the storm. These are the people in the path of the storm. These are at-risk populations who can't do the things that you and I can do, which are, quarantine ourselves, cut off contact, and prepare. Simply not able. So, I mean, economically, if you look at the people that are at risk, certainly the cruise line industry, the airline industry, the hotel industry, and they're going to take some major hits. I mean, you can already see the reverberations in the stock market, which has always been very forward-looking, but right now it's really forward-looking. Like they've figured out, they're doing calculations right now what's going to happen. And I think the thing that alarms me is a lack of outside-the-box thinking. Like why, it's I'm not advocating National Guard on the street. I think what I would advocate for is to say, look, people, it's not a great idea to go on a cruise right now. I mean, period. I mean, and it sucks. You've paid for it. You look forward to it. I think those people should get their money back. I think the cruise ships should stay in port. And I think you should, if you want some creative solutions, take those people that work on cruise ships who are used to taking care of people in confined spaces and hand washing and all that, and go out to these assisted living facilities and put them to work washing hands and sanitizing things, and test them for coronavirus first, and then you put them to work, and you're going to have a ton of empty hotels, and put them to use. Like when the hospital fills up, and they will fill up, what you do is you segment your population. You say, here's a 72-year-old female with who's had a bilateral lung transplant, who is on immunosuppressants, and she has coronavirus. She needs to be in ICU for the entire course of her treatment. And then here's a 38-year-old guy that ran 3 marathons last year and is traveling for business. He has coronavirus. Put him in the local hotel, and have the flight attendants from Delta or wherever who are furloughed or laid off work there, You can, I think there's some creative solutions and things you can do that help everyone, right? That I don't see as an overreaction, but would certainly save a lot of lives. And that's what I worry about is, there's things that you can do that'll hurt the economy in the short term, but you might save 50, 60,000 people, or maybe the number's 100. And I think you should do it.
I like that idea too, because if you had opportunities like that to take people affected, like, as you say, cruise ship employees, and put them to work helping the other people, it feels like we would be less in a passive victim state. Right. You'd be able to see your neighbors helping out, and it would inspire you to. I've thought here in Cambridge, I don't really know my neighbors in this neighborhood, and I've thought I ought to reach out to them just so that we exchange cell phone numbers in case somebody needs something that we could give. But at this point, the crisis isn't enough to overcome my natural shyness to, contact the people next door and say, hey, I'm worried about the coronavirus. You want to talk about it? But I could see some of those things, the scenario you're sketching of even more organized transfers of human compassion and activist sentiment might actually take us to a place that left the country certainly wounded and marred by this thing, but perhaps a little emboldened in spirit.
Well, definitely. I think, these are the sort of times that sort of reveal people's true character, and they test us. We're going to be tested as a country, and it's like, during those times of stress, you also kind of figure out what's important to you, right? Like if your neighbor's house is in the, eye of the storm and they're at a huge risk, I think, your priorities become pretty clear, right? And I think the government's talking about a payroll tax cut, but, I think that doesn't really help people that get laid off or, that are paid hourly and don't get to come to work, right? Those are the people that are at the most risk, right? Like salary people with a big high salary, or, those, they're going to be okay. But there's a lot of folks, I think, that are, there's people who are biologically fragile and at risk on the biological spectrum, and there's people who are economically fragile and at risk there. So, I think what I think about is ways that you can take all these groups, put them together, and say, all right, how do you keep those cruise people employed and use the skills that they have, right? Because you're going to run out of, if this really does, I saw a thing that Angela Merkel, the German chancellor thinks that 60 to 70% of the German population is going to be infected at some point.
Wow.
Which is wild.
I made a little checklist of everyday questions that have emerged in my life, and I thought I know you don't have all the answers, but just to apply what you know about the virus in these situations, you might be able. It could be a sort of an episodic tutorial. One is, I'm way overdue for a haircut. And my stylist in Harvard Square is this wonderful Moroccan woman, Sam, and I suspect she sees maybe 12, 15 clients a day from perhaps all over the world. A lot of people, come to Harvard. And should I instead just buy a set of clippers at Amazon and have Darlene cut my hair for the next 2 months, or is it risky to go get a haircut from Sam?
Your risk is probably pretty low, but in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I don't think I would do it, frankly. I mean, not right now.
Yeah.
I don't think, Lynn, I think you're in your 60s or
69,
late 50s.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you're 29, I probably have a different opinion, but I don't think the risk justifies the reward. I mean, this came up. I saw an article earlier today that someone in Italy was getting their hair cut in the street for this same reason. And I don't feel I think your hair looks great, but you're not taking a ton of pride. Like, it's not going to hurt your daily self-esteem or anything. So right. I think I would get the clippers, and you might like that solution anyway.
Especially with summer coming. Yeah. Darlene, my wife, had a question because she has a friend who puts on quilting workshops. She lives in Maine, and I think we're going to go pick her up in Maine and bring her down. And she's scheduled Saturday to fly to California, a place called Pacific Grove, which is, I think, near Monterey, and teach a workshop for a week of about 12 people making quilts. So she's fairly in close quarters with these 12 people. And then I think there are 5 or 6 other classes at this same complex. So one of these places where, I mean, it's not hundreds or thousands of people gathered together, but, a significant number of people. And she's got a lot of money on the line. I mean, she's a sort of sole practitioner, and if she has to cancel these workshops, it really comes right out of her budget. I think she's probably in her 50s. But what would be the vectors you would see coming to bear on a decision as to whether she ought to pull the plug on that trip?
What's her health status?
She's a cancer survivor, so she's got that history, breast cancer, otherwise quite in good health. Okay.
And the risk factors I would look at are major medical conditions, and especially anything that, if you're taking immunosuppressants for whatever reason, you ask yourself, does your doctor make you get the flu shot every year? Right. Mm-hmm. Like if that's happening, you're probably at a little bit of an elevated risk. And then the question is, like, if you're talking about something in Fairbanks, Alaska, that's less risk than Monterey, California, right? Or anything, frankly, on the West Coast or in an urban setting. Monterey is not the biggest city by any stretch in California, but it is in proximity to very large cities, and it's on a fairly heavily trafficked corridor. And then you have to, evaluate the impact on your life. If this is the one conference she does every year, and this is going to set her business back, that's important. You're saying that it's next week?
Yeah, Saturday she's supposed to fly out.
How about the attendees? Are they still planning to go?
I don't know, and I think there's another entity involved that could conceivably, cancel it the way South by Southwest had to, but it's funny because as one of these events shows up, and I saw it with South by Southwest, there must have been a lot of people not getting much sleep with the city officials in Austin talking to the South by organizers. And I think it's a similar situation on a smaller scale with this workshop where Susan is wondering if she should just not go herself or if the conference organizers will shut it down, and so there's a few players involved.
If she was my wife, I would encourage her to pass on it. And the main reason is that, if the attendees do end up getting coronavirus and someone gets pretty sick, you always just kind of wonder in retrospect, if you had to cancel what might have been. And the problem with this virus is that, and to be frank, that social distancing has a lot of utility, but it's not, the efficacy is not 100%, right? Like this is a virus that can survive on surfaces for a long time. I mean, I don't know if it's 9 hours or 9 days. So, if you're standing here and I'm 10 feet away, and then I move 10 feet away and you come where I was, the virus is still there.
Yeah.
So that's the major problem. And, quilting is not a terribly intimate endeavor. It's not like a wrestling meetup, but I think I would probably pass on it.
Yeah. The other situation that I've noticed, I go to 3 AA meetings a week, and just celebrated 35 years of sobriety, so that's the really important part of my life.
Congratulations.
And and I go to a meeting that has probably 30 or 40 people, and at the end of an AA meeting, the practice is you all hold hands and you say the Lord's Prayer. And as of last week, I was thinking, should we really still be doing this? Maybe we could put our hands on each other's shoulders or something. Yesterday was the first day that I noticed a few people step back from the circle and were not going to hold hands. And today someone brought something up during their share, and we all just stood there with our hands at our side. So, the sense of the exposure had actually changed. It's kind of significant, because in an AA meeting, that's like something that's done all over the world. It's sort of like changing the way communion works in a Catholic church. But even with that, we're 40 people in a room, a little parish hall room. There's a little, talking before and after the meeting. Nobody's standing 6 feet apart. There are chairs. There are things that get touched. And I'm thinking, I'm 69. I'm not in danger of drinking if I don't go to a certain number of AA meetings. Some people who are newer, that's really they would put themselves at considerable risk if they said, I'm not going to go to AA meetings because of coronavirus. But in my situation, it's more, I'm almost 70. And at the same time, one woman said, if this meeting isn't here, it puts me at risk with my alcoholism. And so I feel some compulsion to, maybe go and try to practice as much good. I wore, my sister got these cotton white gloves, and I wore them just almost as a sign of saying, I'm aware of the transmission possibilities. But how would you weigh that set of realities?
I think that is the reality that all of us face, those kind of decisions that, I think the best thing we can do right now is, number one, do a personal risk assessment and say, where am I at health-wise? And, look at those around you. Like, do you have a mother-in-law who lives with you with a compromised immune system or underlying respiratory disorder? And look at, who's in your family, who you have routine contact with, who you put at risk if you were infected, right? And then I think you gotta live your life on some level, right? Like, we can't, there's a certain danger also of becoming too conservative. We risk our lives every day when we get in a car and, eat takeout food. You could get, food poisoning, right? And the flu is certainly a killer annually. But I think that it all has to be, so the right answer is, like so many things in life, know yourself and then know what's important to you. And I think, like you said, I think it's great that person who's in AA would say, this is a vital part of my life and this is worth taking some risk, because if I don't, I risk other consequences in my life, which, have huge negative effects. So I think the question for you would be, how much you're getting out of the meetings at this point. And there is some, if the meeting shrinks from 40 people to 12 people, does that impact the amount of support that the others get, at that meeting? And like you said, you're fairly healthy and at reasonably low risk. But the thing that you can do, and it's so tough. We all touch our face so much, and we're, sometimes you forget and don't wash your hands thoroughly enough before eating. But what my wife and I have done in our cars now is we have like these like Clorox wet wipes now, like you pull one out and then clean your hands with it. And I think that's, before the meetings, I think the gloves are great. And assuming that you don't have some open sore on your hand, you're, even if the coronavirus or like there's virus and bacteria all over our body. I mean, there's tons of it in our gut. So, even if some gets on your hand, you can still kill it. And, you go out into your car and use hand sanitizer. And at the meetings, I would encourage them to have, hand sanitizer on hand and things like that. But, like you said, there's certain things in life that, complete quarantine is not really an option.
Yeah, you're always weighing something against something else. You'd mentioned retirement homes, and my dad's at one just west of here. They today sent word to him, which we heard from his housekeeper, that children 12 and under cannot come and visit residents. And I think there may be about 300 people that live at this kind of a high-end retirement community. And I was curious about that because I thought that children were not as likely to get the virus or to be harmed if they have it. There's something where the risk profile is surprisingly low for children at this point. And if that's the case, why would the first people they said don't come would be children?
So the common knowledge in public health is that children have, their sanitation is lower than adults. They're less likely to wash their hands as thoroughly, and they generally do come into contact with more pathogens, right? And are carriers. In any given day, if you do a lineup and you divide 12 and older, 12 and younger, and you test for everything, the 12 and under likely have more, they're a bigger petri dish, right? So I think they're worried about the 12 and under being carriers and bringing in coronavirus because, the biggest problem with this whole thing is you got asymptomatic carriers running all over the place. The testing for coronavirus is all well and good, but, if someone looks just fine, they've got it and they're spreading it, you're never going to, unless you test everyone. So I think that's a pretty good thought. I think that they're probably, like, if I was running the health department, I would probably start testing, people who work in assisted living facilities for coronavirus. You saw what happened when the bug got loose in that facility in Washington State, and it's just I don't really think that's a reasonable risk to be taken. Test those people. I'd set up sanitation stations.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't let anybody in with any sort of cough or any symptoms whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly. There's a family bit of lore that my mother, who passed away in August, was always kind of an evangelist for, and it was the importance of using eucalyptus, oil of eucalyptus, to ward off colds and flu. And she would give us these little bottles of eucalyptus, and when I smell eucalyptus, I think of my mother. And her story about it is that she had an uncle who was at Fort Devens outside of Boston, and he was about to head to Europe to fight in World War I in 1918, and he died of the flu in the flu epidemic of 1918. And I tried to Google this to see if I could find some confirmation of it, but her memory or her story is that there are all these barracks at this fort, and lots of people were dying of the flu, and for some reason somebody took oil of eucalyptus and washed the walls of one of the barracks with this oil of eucalyptus, and that there were nobody got the flu or nobody died of the flu in that barracks that had been just washed with eucalyptus. And my mother probably heard that story as an impressionable young girl. 60 years later, she's peddling eucalyptus, and I know if she were here now, she would. And my sister is walking around with a bandana soaked in eucalyptus as a way to help her survive the coronavirus. But can you imagine any connecting of that perhaps apocryphal story with any science that might make eucalyptus a tool or something worth considering?
Well, I haven't done any research on the compound, but there's certainly natural antivirals and antibacterial compounds, and they don't the question is, and there's, antifungal and, so the question would be, does it work on this particular virus? I mean, the coronavirus is, family of viruses. We have, I think, 4 that cause the common cold. And then we've got, MERS and SARS, and they're all zoonotic diseases that jump from animals to us. And the SARS and MERS were really deadly. I mean, I think the case fatality rate was maybe 10 to 25%. And this one was much lower, but much more contagious. But yeah, eucalyptus may be a natural antiviral. Don't know. I mean, I don't know if it would work on this, but can't hurt you.
Yeah.
And if it gives you peace of mind, then in some sense that it does work in that sense, right?
Yeah. Well, I totally got the. My sister was definitely getting some relief for it, and I could imagine that I'm not going to wear a bandana. But the other thing I've always carried a handkerchief, when I blow my nose, and I remember some story about a Native American and a Englishman talking about which was the civilized society, and the Englishman had various theories about why the Native American was not civilized. So, yeah, you go around and you blow your nose on a rag and put it back in your pocket. What makes you civilized? But I think spraying eucalyptus on my handkerchief could at least remind me of my mother and open me to the possibility that there's some beneficial effect.
I don't think it can hurt you. I'll say that.
That's good. Well, when you look ahead to the next 25 days, any preparations for you and your family, or your investigation of this? What are you anticipating on this topic in the next few weeks?
Well, here I think before I talked to you, we had stocked up on, we're just kind of anticipating that in the next 4 weeks, at some point, there will be some mandate in which there's, we expect the things that are happening in Washington and California, such as, Memoir, public gatherings, and school will be out. And so we've stocked up on supplies and are kind of ready for that and expecting it. And, I'm hoping for the best, that, the infection rate does kind of plateau and go down. My base case is that we will see this. I think it's going to be hugely disruptive, and I think very scary for people. And the cases are going to go up, they'll plateau, and then they'll go down. And then I think people go back to work and they go back to school. Summer is coming, which is good, from a biological standpoint. But the problem with summer is that there's also a lot more mixing of populations. You have sporting events and, people getting out. And then I suspect we'll see another spike in cases at the end of summer, going into winter, and hopefully we get a vaccine this time next year. It's kind of optimistic. But at that point, my expectation is you go into retirement homes and assisted living, you vaccinate everyone, you get it out to the providers, and it's a flu and COVID vaccine, just like you get now. But like I said, I expect this to become endemic and part of our life. But I think the next 8 weeks, will be kind of tough. I mean, it'll be like a stress test for modern life.
Yeah. At all levels, it'll stress families and states and the country and the world.
For sure.
Good. Well, thank you very much. And I think I'll maybe let my hair grow as long as it was in the 60s.
That's right. I mean, it's sort of returning to your roots.
That's right. I've been speaking with A.G. Riddle, author of Pandemic and Other Science-Based Thrillers. Thanks very much, Jerry.
Thank you for having me.
I've got a few follow-up notes after the interview. Jerry's advice on Darlene's Quilting Teachers Workshop was prescient because we learned later in the week that the workshop had been canceled by the convener, so she's not heading out to Monterey, California. Also, since my conversation with Jerry, the independent living community where Dad lives has expanded its coronavirus-related restrictions beyond children under 12. I received an email today from the community's executive director who wrote, "We are asking residents to be diligent and to not invite any visitors to the community, including family. If there is an urgent or necessary reason that you need a family member to visit for medical reasons, personal care help, etc., please designate one family member or one responsible party if family member is not available. The designated family member responsible party may visit once per day between the hours of 8:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Today, I did visit the place to pick Dad up. He takes a weekly visit to the cemetery, which is nearby in Sudbury, Massachusetts, where Mom was laid to rest in August. And I enjoy these times with him. They're very contemplative, and he loves the site of this. It's a family plot that his dad picked out, and his parents are buried there along with Mom. And I think I had a sense that my time of being able to visit him in person was drawing to a close, but certainly had a memorable time with him this morning at Mount Pleasant Cemetery. As we sat in the Tesla, he shared a poem titled Transition that he'd written recently. It's one of a series of verses that he's been working on really in the past months and years, and they probe profound aspects of his life so far in his 10th decade. They're really amazing work that he's doing. I asked if it would be okay to video him on my iPhone, and he said sure. And when we watched it afterward in the car, he said it would be okay to post it on my Facebook timeline, which I did. It's very short. It's visible on Facebook only to the relatively small list of family and friends that I have there, but I will include a link to it, to the video at the show notes at thekindlechronicles.com in case you'd like to see it. Here's the audio track, and I hope you'll enjoy it. It misses the winning and deep smile that he gave to me after he concluded reading the verse. He's getting joy from a place which is deep because it's, in his belief, eternal, and I find it quite inspiring. Here he is reading his poem, Transition.
Transition. You find yourself between life on earth and eternal life in heaven. One of your years could be worth as much satisfaction as 7. However long it is, you're on your way toward finding your love on a happy day.
I'm finding my life full of intensity these days. A moment like that, poem read to my dad. He's 93. And then following the news, I just received something from the city of Cambridge reporting that the Public Health Department announced that one Cambridge resident has tested positive for COVID-19, while 2 Cambridge residents tested presumptive positive for COVID-19. All 3 cases were linked to the Biogen leadership meeting, which was held in Boston in late February. I think there are like 70 cases that can be traced to that one meeting. None of the individuals in Cambridge have been hospitalized, and they are self-isolating at home. I had some follow-up email with Jerry because Darlene and I were wondering if the pros and cons of relocating to the cottage in Maine for a while, given that Boston seems to be emerging as another potential hotspot in terms of outbreaks. And we are going to head up tomorrow, but I don't think we're going to plan to stay there indefinitely because, as Jerry pointed out, there might be fewer cases there, but it's hard to match the hospital infrastructure here in the Boston area, and that if either of us needs to be treated for the virus, this is probably a better place to be than southern Maine. Lots of moving pieces to this, including being close to Rue and Mike, my daughter and son-in-law next door with the kids, and wondering what kinds of exposure to them makes sense. These are really tricky calls, because part of the reason we're out here is to help out, and I don't like the idea that I'm kind of self-isolating away from my grandsons at this time. But we're kind of feeling our way, and each day trying to decide where the right place to be is. And in any event, I'm looking forward to some time up in Ocean Park. This time of year, it's just beautiful up there. The beach is empty, and the fire in the fireplace is very cozy. So if we have 3 or 4 days up there, it's going to be a nice break and rest for the soul. Next week's guest is going to be quite a change of pace from the COVID-19 story. I will be speaking with Jason Diakité, a wildly successful hip-hop artist from Sweden who has written a new memoir that includes the story of his family's history in the U.S., a lot of it taking place in Harlem and New York City. The book is A Drop of Midnight, and it's a translation into English, published on March 1st by Amazon Crossing. As always, I'm continuing to post a 5-minute morning journal flash briefing each day, and you can listen to it on your Alexa device if you'd like to. To follow along, just say, Alexa, enable morning journal.
I don't have an opinion on that.
Okay. And then you say, Alexa, what's new? If you have several flash briefings that you listen to, you can go directly to mine by saying, Alexa, play my morning journal flash briefing. I hope you are washing your hands thoroughly.
From
and
Len Edgerly's Morning Journal.
Alexa, stop. And then, washing your hands regularly, and whatever new social distance arrives in your daily routine. I hope it has some time for reading some great books on your Kindle or watching some good movies on your Fire or your TV. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I really appreciate your listening to my podcast. Have a good day. Bye.